In its simplest sense, it is looking at what already is working within the constraints, the taboos of the community before you or I come in to do anything. It's the solution which is already sitting there. Robert Frost said in one of his poems, "We dance around in a circle and suppose, but the secret and truth sits in the middle and knows." That's positive deviance. It's there before our very eyes.
Sometimes, instead of looking at what already works, NGOs and the likes and all of us are very eager to help people, to provide our expertise and skills and help people. And in a way, we prevent those treasures, those nuggets of gold, those people who have the skills to do everything, from emerging and being recognized and particularly leveraging their skills, their behaviors, their strategies that are sustainable because they're already there.
In 1990, Jerry Sternin, accompanied by his wife Monique and 10-year-old son Sam, arrived in Hanoi to open an office for Save the Children, a US-based NGO. The Vietnamese government had invited them to develop a wide-scale, sustainable program to combat childhood malnutrition. The Sternins were given 6 months to succeed or their visas would be revoked. When they arrived in December, the clock was already ticking.
My husband and I, of course, French-American, but we don't know anything about Vietnam. We don't speak the language. We don't have staff. We don't have an office. We're not nutritionists. We're not expert in nutrition either. So what can we do?
At that time, upwards of 65% of all children under the age of 3 were suffering from 2nd and 3rd degree malnutrition, which is moderate to severe malnutrition. So 2 out of every 3 Vietnamese children were at risk of being lost to the community. They would never reach their full intellectual and physical potential.
We turned to actually a book that had just been written called Positive Deviance for Childhood Nutrition. That was a collection of surveys or research that had been done by nutritionists, specialists, scientists.
We said if we can take that notion that there's a bell curve and there are people at the end of the bell curve, the positive end, if we can translate that into action, maybe we can meet this 6-month deadline.
You had organizations that existed at the grassroots level, but they had never worked before together on the issue of childhood malnutrition. So all we did as catalysts is to bring together this silo organization.
So we began working with 4 communities in the northern part of Vietnam, 20,000 people, and around 3,000 children under the age of 3. We then asked the volunteers for each child they had weighed to give a rating, socioeconomic status to the family. And in Vietnam 1990, the 3 categories the villages chose were poor, very poor, and very, very poor. We then, after all the children had been weighed by the volunteers, we called the volunteers together and said, "May I see your list? Are there any children on your list who come from very, very, very poor families who are well nourished?" They looked at their list and said, "Gaw, gaw, gaw. Yes, yes, yes." We said, "You mean it's possible right now for a very, very poor family to have a well-nourished child?" "Gaw, gaw, gaw. Yes, yes, yes." We said, "Well, let's go and see what they're doing, which is different." The health volunteers and members of the health staff went to visit the positive deviants, those poor families with well-nourished kids. What they discovered in the first 4 villages as some of the positive deviant practices were, in every case where there was a well-nourished kid, despite poverty, somebody was going out to the rice paddies and collecting tiny shrimps and crabs, the size of one joint of one finger, adding those to the child's diet, as well as the top of sweet potato greens.
At the end of that year, 1,000 children had been sustainably rehabilitated. Within 3 years, the program was designated a national nutrition model. By 2000, 10 years later, more than 2.3 million Vietnamese children had been rehabilitated. Over time, the PD model in nutrition was shared widely and utilized in more than 41 countries. Today, the positive deviance approach has been adopted and adapted to work with communities all over the world on a wide-ranging spectrum of problems. For more than 2 decades, wherever they made their home in the world, Jerry and Monique set a dinner table for friends and family that was generous, welcoming, and warm. Their son Sam grew up at that traveling table, stirring pots on top of stool to reach the stove. Dinner parties were events. Monique, the master engineeress, running in 3 directions at once, operating as sous chef to Jerry at the stove, greeting guests at the door, cutting flowers from the garden, designing the table with a simple elegance that spoke French, Burmese, Bengali, and Concord, Massachusetts, all at once. Chances are, if you got near the kitchen, Jerry would hand you a wooden spoon and make you part of the dinner brigade. You had no right being left-hand cook to his truly gourmet chef menu, but it didn't matter. As with everything else, if Jerry believed in you, you would deliver.
So next to the piled up dishes that I would face when I got into the kitchen was also the incredibly fragrant, beautiful smells that he filled the kitchen with. And Jerry would work this incredible magic, and he would always leave me delicious little bowls of leftovers. I would be treated to his incredible Asian sausages with pea pods and herbs.
Jerry was a complex person. There were a lot of contradictions. On the one hand, he was very generous, but demanding. He was very Spartan, but Jerry was a gourmand at the same time. You have to come to Nice. There's this ice cream store that has 15 different flavors that you've never imagined. Mustard flavored sorbet or lavender. The thing that inspired me the most about Jerry was he brought all of himself to what he did. He was the least compartmentalized person I ever met. And he invited you to bring all of yourself to what you did.
With his humor and his lovely way of asking questions and listening, he brought out into the open those things that he saw in you. We all thought that we were his best friends and so important in his life.
Jerry came to Pittsburgh to introduce PD to our medical community. Out went the long table, the high back chairs. They were all replaced with folding chairs that we've configured in circles of 6. Jerry transformed a room that reflected a vertical hierarchy into a horizontal community that fostered open small group discussion. Jerry attended to us, and we are better for it.
Jerry was unbelievably talented and had so many natural gifts that we could not imagine the things he could or would do. Standing in front of a delegation of Chinese officials singing "Old MacDonald Had a Farm" or throwing paperwork under the table at a Save the Children meeting. His unique approach to life was wise, fun-filled, intelligent, and packed with sheer positiveness. It would open doors to people, programs, and whole new realms that had long seemed closed.
Jerry was a master storyteller, acutely aware of his listening audience. He could hold them spellbound, whether 1 or 1,000, with story which always ultimately acknowledged who they were. He pulled us in with his unpretentious pose, which cloaked the brilliance glistening there. It was his way, teaching big, even complex lessons. He was always teaching, and somehow, he always made it feel like fun.
I want to tell you this minute story. I was working last March in Afar in Ethiopia with traditional nomads, nomadic herders who can no longer live as they have for generations because of the drought in Ethiopia and also because of warfare, so they can't get their animals to the market. We were told Afar are absolutely the fiercest people you will ever meet. They're very secretive. They will not share anything. you can't do it. Well, we went the first day to the village, and of course they weren't in the village because they're herders, so we had to go for the next 3 days to the watering hole. And they're at the watering hole with the afar with their Kalashnikovs and their swords and their long horned steer and camels and goats and the dust being kicked up. And for 3 days, there were no benches, so we sat on the ground listening to the afar talk about their lives, the situation. On day 3, on the way back to our camp, the translator said, I have to tell you something. I didn't translate it during the session because it wasn't said to you, it was said about you. Remember those 2 old guys huddled there with the walking sticks and the kind of straggly beard? One of them turned to the other and said, this is extraordinary. They have come for 3 days to sit at our feet and listen. Even our children don't pay us that kind of respect. And in the following days, they shared everything, and they were totally open. And I was so moved because I intuitively believed that. But when the translator said, they have come to sit at our feet and listen, that's become the metaphor for Monique and me as we continue doing positive deviance work. Monique and I have lived for 25 years in 8 very, very foreign cultures, and know that, when you're totally ignorant, you're like a baby in each new culture. Life experience has convinced us that unless you listen, you can't achieve anything.
Telling me banana, daylight come and wanna go home. I got a great big bunch of ripe banana. Daylight come and wanna go home. Hiding deadly black tarantula. Daylight come and I wanna go home. Day is a day, is a day, is a day, is a day, is a day home. Days I come and me wanna go home.